Okay, now we're going to start with problem 26-4A. And in this chapter in 26, we're dealing with allocating overhead to specific products. So for instance, if we produce 3 products, one way to allocate overhead would be divide total overhead by 3 and give each product a third of the overhead. That's about as basic as you could get. So if we're producing lollipops, bubble gum, let's just say lollipops and bubble gum, we could say, okay, half the overhead gets allocated to lollipops, half gets allocated to bubble gum, just divided by 2. Okay, that will work, but that's probably not the most accurate way to assign overhead to a product. Probably the most accurate way developed to this point is a method that they go into here in chapter 26 called activity-based costing. And what they're doing there is assigning overhead based on some type of activity level. First, they determine an estimate of that particular type of overhead. For instance, here, one of their activities is production. Well, and there's some overhead in the production process. Okay, they've decided the activity that drives the overhead in the production process is machine hours. So they picked it for their activity base. And that probably makes sense. In the production facility, a lot of the overhead is probably maintenance and depreciation on the machinery. So the more machine hours it runs, the more depreciation and the more maintenance, conceivably. So that's probably a really good activity base to pick. So what they would do then, you guys, is take their estimate of the overhead incurred in production, divided by the activity base, which was machine hours, and we get a rate per machine hour. Then we would assign our production overhead cost to our 3 products, M5, Z4, and I8. The amount of production overhead cost that they'd receive would be based on the number of machine hours used for M5, the number of machine hours used for Z4, and the number of machine hours used for I8. As you can see, this is a much more accurate method for allocating or assigning overhead to a product than just saying, okay, we have 3 products, total overhead cost is $569,600. Let's divide that number by 3, and we'll give that much overhead to each of our 3 products. It's just not nearly as accurate. And if you assign overhead incorrectly, it can make you think a particular product line is profitable when it's not, or that it's not profitable when it really is. So it makes it more difficult to make management type decisions. So we'll use this activity-based costing instead. Now let's read through the problem itself. And if I go to there, then you can see the entire form. This is our chart that we'll fill out for number 1. It's our chart we'll fill out for number 2. And then they give us a space to answer a question there for number 3. Okay. Teldar Manufacturing Company is a diversified manufacturer that manufactures 3 products, as we've mentioned, M5, Z4, and I8. Now, these products are produced in a continuous production process. Senior management has asked the controller, who would be just the head managerial accountant, to conduct an activity-based costing study. The controller identified the amount of factory overhead required by the critical activities of the organization as follows. Okay, so they give you the amount of overhead generated through production, through setups. Setups would be changing the production line so that we can make Z4s rather than M5s, or change it so we can make I8s rather than Z4s, or M5s rather than I8s. So you have to set up the production line specifically for that particular product. That setup time or downtime in the factory is part of factory overhead. They're saying the activity that drives it is the number of setups, which makes sense. Materials handling, the activity cost there, getting raw materials in, storing them, watching over them in the warehouse, that kind of thing. They're going there with the number of parts, I guess number of parts handled. Inspection, number of inspection hours spent for that particular product is how we'll allocate it. And then product engineering, number of engineering hours spent on that particular product. And you guys, I think you can see already that if we allocate overhead this way, it's much more accurate system than just dividing that 569,600 by 3 and saying M5 gets a third, Z4 gets a third, and I8 gets a third. Okay, so next, they tell us the number of machine hours, setups, parts, inspection hours, and engineering hours spent on each of the 3 products. They say each product requires 0.8 machine hours per unit. Okay, now that's an interesting part of the problem to me. You're going to notice that the total overhead assigned to each of the 3 products is going to be different, even though each of the 3 products uses the same amount of machine hours to be produced. So even if we divided up the overhead just based on machine hours, they'd all 3 get the same amount of cost if the same number of units was produced of each of the 3 products. Okay, number 1, determine the activity rate for each activity. Okay, so let's start with production. You guys, your total activity cost there is $264,000. Then we're going to say that's going to be allocated based on machine hours. Total machine hours were 2,200, which is what we want to divide by to get our rate. And then it's just going to equal 264,000 divided by 2,200 machine hours, and we get a rate of $120 per machine hour. That's how we'll assign the overhead generated through production to the various products. Okay, then let's calculate the rate for setups. The cost there is $96,000. We're going to allocate that based on the number of setups. Total number of setups is 400. So we're going to say 96,000 divided by 400. And we get $240 per setup. So you guys, instead of just calculating one single plant-wide overhead rate like you've seen in previous problems, the job order cost problem, I think, gave you a rate of maybe $50 per machine hour. Instead of just allocating overhead using that one rate for all types of overhead, here they're breaking it down. What's causing our overhead? Well, some's caused by production, some by setups, some by materials handling, inspections, and engineering. Well, how could we allocate that or assign that to the products more accurately? And that's what we're trying to do here by using 5 rates rather than just the one. Okay, materials handling. The cost there was $9,600. It's going to be allocated based on the number of parts. Total number of parts is 480. You get $20 per part. The cost on inspections was $50,000. We're going to allocate that based on the number of inspection hours, which was 1,000. We get $50 per inspection hour. Engineering cost there was $150,000. We're going to allocate that based on the number of engineering hours spent. It's 500 in total. So we'll divide 150,000 by 500. We get 300 per engineering hour. And that takes care of number one. On number one, we're just calculating our rates. Then we're given the activity usage for each of the three products in that second chart. We'll multiply those usages by the appropriate rate from number one, and we'll determine the total cost for the product, and then a activity cost per unit, or overhead cost per unit for each of the three products. We'll pick back up with it though in the next video. Thanks.